There's a Congressman, Joseph Crowley, Democrat, New York. He's kind of a bizarre guy. I've seen him on TV from time to time. He usually stands in the back during Democrat press conferences nodding his head. But he actually spoke yesterday on CNN and hat tip Real Clear Politics. I want you to listen to what he says. Cut one, go.
If the Republican bill would have passed today, we'd be giving a $160,000 tax cut to millionaires. I just don't think that makes any sense in this economy or any economy, quite frankly. To be a millionaire in this country, the greatest country the world has ever known, it's a privilege to live in this country, and I think most people get that.
All right, let's stop right there. Because all the abuse of language and the propaganda needs to be parsed out a little bit here. The Republican bill, if it would have passed, which was a status quo tax rates bill, the same tax rates that have been in existence for 12 years, we'd be giving $160,000 in tax cuts to millionaires. This is how fascists think and talk. I'm not saying this congressman is one. Perhaps he doesn't even understand it. He doesn't strike me as too intelligent. But these are the words that are spewed by people who promote tyranny. Again, I'm not sure this guy even knows what he's saying, but he said it. The government's not giving anything to anybody who earns $1 million. To say that they get to keep 2/3 or 3/4 or 3/5 of what they earned and no more, because otherwise the government is giving them money, is preposterous. Unless you believe that the government owns everything and that the people you elect to Congress are the ones to determine how much you get to keep. Remember, the purpose of taxation is to fund the legitimate ends of government under the Constitution. It's not to empower a relative handful of temporary politicians and a massive permanent bureaucracy to determine what kind of lifestyle you can have, whether you have too much, or even whether you have too little. It's to fund the legitimate constitutional functions of government. But they never even talk about this anymore because they've spun off the Constitution, which I'll get to in a moment. So when you are unmoored from the Constitution, unmoored from our heritage, from the principles and the morals of our founding, you talk like this. You talk like we live in the old Soviet Union or in Red China or whatever it is. Now let's start this clip from the beginning, Mr. Producer, and I want you to listen to it, folks, really with wide open ears, because this is the language of totalitarian regimes. Cut one, go.
If the Republican bill would have passed today, we'd be giving a $160,000 tax cut to millionaires. I just don't think that makes any sense in this economy or any economy, quite frankly. To be a millionaire in this country, the greatest country the world has ever known, it's a privilege to live in this country.
Stop. Okay. Yes, it is a privilege, a blessing to live in this country. But it's not a privilege to make $1 million or to make $1,000 or $100,000. The word privilege has nothing to do with it. Who's granting us this privilege? The government? You see, this gentleman, Joseph Crowley, he's the congressman. Congressman Joseph Crowley, Democrat, New York, he rejects the Declaration of Independence. Again, he doesn't sound too bright, so he may be doing it unwittingly. Unalienable rights. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If your pursuit motivates you to make $1 million or $10 million, so be it. So it's not a privilege. The creation of prosperity, which resonates throughout an economy, which improves the lot for so many people, is not something that government grants. It's not something that some congressman grants. So why did I play this clip of a relatively unknown member of Congress, a backbencher? Because he sounds like virtually every other Democrat in Congress, every other Democrat on TV, every other Democrat running for office. Sounds like Obama and Biden and all the rest of them. I'm trying to do everything I can to explain that these people have it backwards. You know, I wrote the book Liberty and Tyranny. For them, it's tyranny and liberty. Now, we can never give relative strangers who happen to get elected to public office this kind of power over our lives and our futures and over the next generation. Why would we do that? We'll make the decisions for ourselves and our families and their futures. We didn't grant that to these people. The Constitution doesn't authorize it. I don't know anything about Joseph Crowley, Democrat, New York, or to be honest with you, 90% of the other members of Congress, how they live their lives, whether they're moral people, what their priorities are. It doesn't matter because under our Constitution, that's not supposed to have this kind of power over us. And those of you out there, the leftists, who are still into this class warfare stuff, it's not really even about class warfare. It's about your liberty. Your liberty. And if you don't want to defend your liberty, that's fine, but don't drag all the rest of us down the toilet with you. But he's not alone. A much more prominent Democrat said essentially the same thing on July 9th of this year and has said it many times before. That would be Barack Obama. Now, Barack Obama, we know, infamously, on July 13th, talked about how successful people aren't really successful on their own. They owe it to government. But on July 9th, and I played it back then, he also said this. Cut 7, go.
So the money we're spending on these tax cuts for the wealthy is a major driver of our deficit, a major contributor to our deficit, costing us $1 trillion over the next decade.
So stop right there and wind it back. So there's Obama saying, flat out saying, the money we're spending on these tax cuts, the only way the government can be spending money on tax cuts is if the government has a right to your wealth. Otherwise, how is the government spending anything on your tax cuts? The money belongs to you, not to the government. This is very, very important. This is a line of demarcation between liberty and totalitarianism. Please, you need to understand the history of man. This is the language of fascists, of communists, of socialists, or as I call them all, so we don't have to split hairs, because that's not my point, statists. The state is the purpose of your existence. Funding it and it controlling you. It's the center of the wheel from which all the spokes come out. It's not limited. It's ubiquitous. It's pervasive. You have a president of the United States completely rejecting the Declaration of Independence, completely rejecting his limited role and the limited role of the federal government under the Constitution, completely rejecting the notion of unalienable rights, of private property rights, by saying this. Cut 7 again, go.
So the money we're spending on these tax cuts for the wealthy is a major driver of our deficit, a major contributor to our deficit, costing us $1 trillion over the next decade. By the way, these tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans are also the tax cuts that are least likely to promote growth. So we can't afford to keep that up, not right now. So I'm not proposing anything radical here.
He's not proposing anything radical here. What came out of his mouth is as radical as it gets. That your property doesn't belong to you. And you might say, well, who cares? He's talking about millionaires and billionaires. No, he's talking about you. The theory doesn't change based on your income level. The theory doesn't change based on some IRS chart on what category you fit into, this class or that class of citizen. The theory is the same, that an all-powerful central government run by temporary politicians using an army of permanent bureaucrats gets to decide what you get to keep. It's not about millionaires and billionaires. It's about liberty. And that's the problem. That's why you'll never have growth under this president. You'll have a continuing cycle of the expansion of government. It can never get smaller. It's always going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because they have to squeeze the liberty out of the system. They have to squeeze the private out of property. They have to take your wealth to fund their paradise. You can see it in the states. You can see it in Maryland. You can see it in California. You can see it in Illinois. You can see it in state after state. You can see it in Europe. One disastrous social welfare state after another. You can even see it in communist regimes like Red China, right on the bubble, getting ready to blow up. But you can see it in our country too, because we are a post-constitutional America, where politicians from a president to an unknown backbencher, Democrat member of the House from New York, say the same thing, because this now is the mantra of one of the major parties in the United States of America. That your wealth doesn't belong to you, no matter how much wealth you have. That your hard work doesn't belong to you. That you keep what they say you can keep, if they think the government can afford to let you keep it. It's absolutely stunning